Not for the first time, Dr. Tony Hill wondered how on earth he'd ended up where he was. Probably not for the last time either. The woman making her way through the throng towards him was probably the only person in the room he actively wanted to spend any time with. It had been murder that had drawn them together, murder that had led them to their mutual understanding, murder that had taught them respect for each other's mind and morality. Nevertheless, for years now, Detective Chief Inspector Carroll Jordan had been the single colleague who had crossed the border into what he supposed he'd have to label friendship. Sometimes he conceded to himself that friendship wasn't an adequate word for the bond that held them fast, in spite of their complicated history. But even with his years of experience as a clinical psychologist, he didn't think he could come up with an adequate definition. Especially not now. Not here, in a place he didn't want to be. Carol was much better than him at avoiding things she didn't want to do. She was also very good at identifying what those were and acting accordingly. But she had actually chosen to be here tonight. For her, it held a significance that Tony couldn't buy into. Sure, John Brandon had been the first senior cop to take him seriously, to lift him out of the world of treatment and research and put him on the front line of live criminal profiling. But if it hadn't been him, it would have been someone else. Tony appreciated Brandon's championing of the value of profiling, but they'd never progressed further than a professional relationship. He would have avoided this evening if Carol hadn't insisted that people would find it odd if he didn't turn up. Tony knew he was odd. Still, he preferred other people not to realize quite how odd. So here he was, a thin smile in place whenever anyone caught his eye. Carol, conversely, looked born to the breed, slipping easily through the crowd in a shiny dark blue dress that emphasized all the right curves, from shoulders through breasts to hips and calves. Her blonde hair seemed lighter, though Tony knew this was because of the increasing strands of silver among the gold, rather than the ministrations of a hairdresser. As she moved through the room, greetings animated her face, lips smiling, eyebrows rising, eyes widening. Finally, she made it to his side, passing him a glass of wine. She took a swig from her own. "You're drinking red," Tony said. "The white's unspeakable." He took a wary sip. "And this is better? Trust me." Given how much more she drank than him, it was tempting. "Are there going to be speeches?" "The Deputy Chief Constable's saying a few words." "A few? That'll be a first." "Quite. But as if that's not enough, they've exhumed God's copper to present John with his gold watch." Tony reared back in horror that was only partly an act. "Sir Derek Armthwaite? Isn't he dead?" "Sadly not. Since he was the chief constable who promoted John up the ranks, they thought it would be a nice touch to invite him along." Tony shuddered. "Remind me not to let your colleagues organize my leaving, do." "You won't get one. You're not one of us," Carol said, smiling to take any sting out of her words. "You'll just get me taking you out for the best curry in Bradfield." Before Tony could say more, a powerful PA blasted through the conversation, introducing the Deputy Chief Constable of Bradfield Metropolitan Police. Carol emptied her glass and slipped away into the crowd, intent on another drink, and, he imagined, a little light networking. She'd been a chief inspector for a few years now, most recently running her own crack major incident team. He knew she was torn between using her skills at the sharp end and the desire to reach a level where she could influence policy. Tony wondered whether the choice would be taken from her now John Brandon was out of the picture. His religion told him that every life held the same value, but Detective Inspector Stuart Patterson had never been able to keep faith with that tenet in his relations with the dead. Some skanky heroin addict knifed in a pointless turf war was never going to move him as much as this dead and mutilated child did. He stood to one side of the sheltering white tent that protected the crime scene from the steady drumbeat of the night's rain, letting the specialists get on with it, trying to avoid the comparison between this dead girl and his own barely teenage daughter.